I'm like, have you ever met a CEO in your life? Have you ever talked to any CEO and they can save $10 and invest $9 to grow faster than their competitor? They'll do it 100% of the time. People are sort of like literally translating a lot of these cost savings and like just assuming it's going to be passed on to shareholders. No, we live in like a capitalist economy. What's going to happen is if you end up with higher margins because you have a more efficient business, you can invest in customer acquisition, perhaps you can lower prices. There's all these things that happen from it. I mean, that's worth more to your shareholders than any amount of cost savings. So that's the thing I would think about is really like, how can this actually change, like bend the curve of your operating model? And what does that mean for your industry? And I think it's an opportunity for insurgents to become incumbents.
This is going to be a fun one. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Bret Taylor. Bret is the co-founder of Sierra. It is a company that's dedicated to helping businesses build better and more human customer experiences with AI. You know, I'll say on a personal and business note, if you felt that Ramp's approach to support or experience has gotten a lot better over the past year, well, Bret is exactly why. I think they've been an incredible partner to us.
Thank you. It means so much, and I just love being here. And we're also a happy Ramp customer. So while I don't have many support problems with Ramp, I try to manifest them occasionally to use your AI agent and bask in its glory. So
I love it being able to dog food and feel it. But I'm gonna try to make Bret blush just a little bit, and we'll see how we do here. But to give a bit of background on him, he is I think an extraordinary track record as a technologist and an operator. He's someone I deeply look up to. So he previously served as the co-CEO of Salesforce. He founded Quip. He was the chief technology officer of a company called Facebook. And he began his career at Google, where he co-created Google Maps. I use it every day. Helps people who are challenged with directions like me even get around. And he serves as the chairman of the board at OpenAI. He has a lot of experience at the intersection of both enterprise technology as well as AI. I think he can offer an incredibly valuable perspective, not just on where AI is going, but how to think about this strategically for folks tasked with making these kinds of investments. Specifically, how can AI and next generation tools transform finance from a back office function to what we believe is very much a strategic engine for growth. With that, I'm excited to get into his insights on leadership, building products, and navigating the world we're living in now.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe just to give the general backdrop and context for folks who are a little less familiar. What is in a short couple sentences? What's Sierra? What's the problem you're trying to solve? Where's it headed?
So Sierra is a company that helps companies build agents for their customer experience. So if you call a 1-800 number, perhaps one of the worst possible experiences as a human being is waiting on hold. Second only to press 3 for this, press 4 for that. Our mission in life is that you will never have to wait on hold ever again. And when you call that number or chat with that agent, you'll get something that's multilingual, that's empathetic, that can instantly help you with your problems. For a place like Ramp, it can help solve 90% of problems without having to escalate to a person, which I think is pretty amazing as a consumer. But more than anything, our hope is that if you think about customer service and the history of it, it's been largely viewed as a cost center. And so it turns out that if you call someone, you actually talk to someone on the phone, it usually costs between $10 or $20 to have that interaction. And most interactions aren't worth $10 or $20. It just sort of kills the margins of most companies. So as a consequence, most companies are forced to make it hard to talk to them. And it's very dehumanizing. And I joke, it's probably easier for me to talk to Sundar than talk to Google customer support, which is true. And it's because the average revenue per user of Google just doesn't warrant that service. This is not possible to do economically. And now with agents, it's possible. And I think that's really exciting. I joke that there might be a Super Bowl ad one day where someone puts their phone number in the ad because it will be economical to do so just as much as putting a URL in an ad. And so that's really exciting. So we're really excited for the future of customer experience broadly. And in the meantime, maybe making it so none of us have to wait on hold ever again.
I mean, I think beyond just, I think it's been just like a quantum jump in terms of capabilities as a consumer or someone operating a business. But I'd also note, like, you just are, I don't know that people know even to the extent of it, but one of the fastest growing companies in history, operating at an extraordinary scale. And I'm curious how you just approach building your infrastructure, your financial stack from day one, How are you planning just for this extraordinary pace of growth?
So I promise not to make this just a Ramp ad, but I can't overstate how significant it is to our company. I've had the privilege of starting 2 other companies, and I'm not that old, but when my first company, we actually had to build our own servers and put them in a co-location facility. By the second company, Amazon Web Services was prevalent, so we didn't have to do that anymore. But we had to hire a lot of people to do not just expense reports. I loved your marketing stunt in New York. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen, and I was obsessed with it. It's deeper than that. I think of Ramp, and I hope you become our back office. That's what I think of you as. That's my mental model of what Ramp is to us, where we can just build our business and not have to worry about those things. And the reason I brought up Amazon Web Services is because at my social network, we were building our own servers. We had to have people who understood data centers and hardware, and those people just didn't exist at my last company at all. And it meant we could focus on what we were building, which was at the time productivity software. And now with Sierra, it's almost like we're a more self-actualized company because everyone at the company is just working on what we do differently. And corporate credit cards and expense reporting aren't one of those things. I don't want to ever think about it. And I'm particularly excited about what you're doing in AI because it's also just all the workflows around it. And I wonder if we will get to a point. I was once a public company CEO, and your quarter ends, and then there's this 3-week period where you just pay all sorts of people millions of dollars to verify that your books are correct. And it's looking for everything from auditing your contracts for different revenue recognition rules to ensuring that how you report your expenses align with this new accounting standard, yada yada yada. You have Ernst & Young, you have attorneys, and I'm just like, couldn't an AI agent just do that for me? And I don't know your roadmap, but I just hope as we grow up with you, I just hope I can push a button and like a lot of this will just happen for our business so we can do what we do, which is build AI agents for customer experience. And that's really exciting for me. And I think it's really empowering for entrepreneurs in particular because so much of what it meant to build a company had nothing to do with your value proposition. It was just the mechanics of building a company. And it's really neat. It's like a business as a service and I could just like install it. And that's pretty amazing.
I mean, maybe transition just into AI more broadly. When you think about where models are going, I think we're in this phase where first people are trying to go and, you have some body of work, you'll ask AI, if you like it, you kind of bring it into your workflow. And in certain cases, you've sort of jumped into not just lowering costs, but, providing the outcome. You actually drive and do the work. I'm curious how you think about, how AI can be used by companies not just to lower costs, do somebody's work, but perhaps even to unlock new products, services, revenue models. How have you thought about it at Sierra, and what frameworks might you give to folks out here thinking about how to evolve their business models for what AI can do in a world where it can do work?
I'll start broad and then sort of end with the Sierra vantage point because I think it is broader than just Sierra. I like to think things through in first principles, and what large language models enable is you can converse with computers now, and they actually understand what you're saying. That's a big deal. We've gone from punch cards to mice and keyboard to touch screens, and now I think both text, audio, and eventually video are now form factors for software, and that's really empowering and accessible and very, very exciting. And it enables things like the phone to be a digital channel now, which it never has been before. Number 2, they can do basic reasoning. They're not quite superhuman yet, though they are in some domains, but they can reason as well as you and I on a lot of things. And they can generate text, images, video, and other things like that. If you think of those as ingredients from which you can create like recipes, that's pretty transformative because all 3 of those things were impossible 3 years ago, and now they're effectively commodities, which is a funny thing to say, but they are. So you're like, okay, how can I use that to grow my business? How many BDRs and SDRs do you have on your sales team? They're really effective, but could an AI agent amplify that so you could do 100 times the calls with the same number of people? If you think about consumer insights, how many people are basing their really high gravity business decisions on NPS surveys and CSAT surveys and things that have very low opt-in rates and high selection bias. And maybe you can use this to actually just truly listen to your customers, like literally what they're all telling you. And I have a sense we're going to move to a world where a company's AI agent will be as important as their website or their mobile app. And these AI agents can mutate. They can go into different forms. They can be on an Alexa smart speaker. They can be operating over the phone. They can be on WhatsApp. They could be in your mobile app. They're multilingual. They can truly capture not just the structured information, but the unstructured. It's a funny way to think about it, but showing my age again, in the early days of the internet, there was directories like Yahoo directory. And it took Google search to exist for the long tail of the internet to exist, because like blogs and small business commerce sites, because it kind of opened the door from the yellow pages style thing to actually this free form. You can think about most digital customer experiences as a directory. There's literally a menu of options that you're allowed to click. And now with an agent, it's free form. So customers will actually take your business in directions you didn't foresee. So even now, taking to Sierra for a second, and obviously I'm totally biased in this, but Sierra agents are doing mortgage sales. They're processing small business payroll. They're selling video hosting services in multiple languages. More recently, they're helping people file health claims. I was actually just on stage with Cigna in Las Vegas, and it's just amazing to me that these are happening. So I think people think of these things, I think, more transactionally or simply, like I'm just answering questions. I think this can really help truly grow people's businesses in a way that I think we're just in the early innings of it. I just don't think people have really conceptualized how powerful these technologies can be.
I mean, I think what's so interesting to me, even this as a customer of Sierra and experienced this, is like, we came into this thinking, okay, this is software for customer experience. We're going to help people go and solve a problem, and that would be that. We could do it at lower cost and hopefully at higher accuracy. And then it turns out, these agents are trained not just on our support infrastructure, but also can start to understand what makes for great activated customers. And you see suddenly usage of Ramp goes up. We're generating more sales, and this kind of warping of functions, I think, is very, very real, where it's not just a cost management thing, but actually there's true value being created. And I'm sort of curious how you think about someone who, in your own company, you're allocating a lot of capital, where I think maybe something that's on the mind of probably many of us in this audience is, over the past few years, we've been, hearing AI seems interesting. We said, fine, we'll give a little bit of budget. People can experiment with it. And the, budgets for next year are starting to come together. And some people are saying, yeah, the experiment, well, we don't want to spend $100,000. We want to spend $1 million on it. And these are becoming a little bit operational. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. Probably depends on the nature of it. But I'm curious for your framework, Bret, as you think about which, when you're green lighting bets in investments that are predominantly AI-based, how do you think about it? What's your framework for making that investment decision? How much you advise, the finance leaders here today to think about where to invest and how to validate?
It's a great question. I have a phrase. I've tried to teach the sales team at Sierra, which is AI tourism. And it's the people who want to do proofs of concept to make people like you or their board happy, but they really have no plan for it. It's just sort of to say they did it. And so part of our deal qualification is this AI tourism? We have a lot of questions to filter it, because there's so much pressure from public markets today to drive cost efficiencies primarily, though growth as well around AI. And it's coming from boards all the way down through CEOs. So there's sort of this effect where, internally and sort of, candidly sort of political environments, you're credited for this tourism. I'll make one bold bet and answer more practically and actionably, which is I hope we can get to the point where you're not investing in AI, but investing in outcomes to problems. As an example, as I think about the back office, I wasn't exaggerating when I said I hope Ramp does that for us. But I don't think of Ramp as AI. I think of Ramp as a solution to a problem for my company. And I hope with all the AI you're building into the product, it just becomes more powerful, and I need fewer people and finance operations and all that to do more with less. but I don't want it to be AI. I just want it to solve my problem. And I think we're just in the early stage of the adoption of AI, where it's like the early days of computers. When mainframes first came out, most companies had to hire professional services firms to implement everything from what is now would be called ERP systems and CRM systems. And then the software market matured and you'd buy it off the shelf. And now with software as a service, most companies don't want to build software anymore. They don't want to be software companies. I joke software is like a lawn. You have to maintain it. And so the total cost of ownership of software sucks. So it just makes sense to buy from a company that will amortize that R&D cost across thousands of customers. We're so early in AI, there's just not that option for most firms today. So if you want to say you're a CPG company and you have a complex supply chain and you have pretty standard contracts with all of your suppliers, it stands to reason, you're like, gosh, AI should be able to do that more with less expense than my outside law firm. Until companies like Harvey, you couldn't really find a solution to that problem. So my anticipation is over the next 2 or 3 years, companies like Ramp, companies like Sarah, companies like Harvey will provide for that department, for that line of business, out-of-the-box solutions. And I think that's the correct way to buy AI. Like, you shouldn't be buying a bag of floating point numbers as a model that's not actually valuable. That's just a piece of infrastructure. In the meantime, you may be faced with the challenge, if there's not a credible vendor in that place, you'll have to decide, do I want to be a first mover in this area and invest in technology I might have to throw out when a vendor's available? And that answer might be yes, actually, just because of the urgency of the market. But I think you should have the mentality of, you should check in with the market every 3 to 6 months, because vendors are coming faster than you might think. Companies like ours are growing faster than most companies in history because we're just at this interesting inflection point in the market, and you may have to throw out some work. And that's okay. It's like just the nature of this. But going back just to a more practical answer, in my mind, I really like AI projects where you have a business sponsor and a technology sponsor and a business outcome you're driving. I think with AI, it's very important to turn science into engineering. And if you have someone who says, first, we need to clean up all the data at the company before we can use AI, I'm like, that will literally never happen. There's been no company in the history of companies with clean data. It just doesn't happen. And so I think this idea that you need to wait until your infrastructure is in, then you'll do an acquisition and you have crazy infrastructure again. You'll never get off the treadmill. It just is. But if you have a very clear business problem, you say, let's just take that supply chain example. We get 1,000 contracts a month, and I want to have those contracts approved with 10 people at most on staff within an hour per contract. You can now whittle that down to a really practical set of technology decisions. So I just say, narrow the problem a lot, have a business sponsor and a tech sponsor, and try to remove the generality of the problem, and so that you can actually put practical guardrails around it with existing technology. And that's where I've seen people go from AI tourism to AI reality, is where they can really narrow the problems and just have obsessive pragmatism on the project.
For folks who are adopting that, taking that in stride, and focusing on, okay, there's a business case, we're going to have a framework up front for where ROI is going to come from, and are able to be pretty scientific about it. I think the more we do that, the more maybe investments like this that we're going to go and make. I'm curious what advice you would have for all the operators here, executives, in thinking about kind of the human side of this. I think we're going through a time where there's constant technological disruption. Companies are growing faster. I think the pace of the market is going up, and I think work is going to be done in a very different kind of way. Is there advice that you'd have for people on just coaching that you would recommend people give to their teams, and how to think about this new form of technology, different ways work will get done, or just how to, on a personal side, coach people through learning new skill sets in a way that might have been less comfortable?
I think it's a really hard time for a lot of people in operational roles. You have this combination of your job changing really quickly, which is uncomfortable. And then the press, and I think, Silicon Valley's certainly a partial fault for this, but sort of hyperbolically talking about job loss to the point you have insecurity about the future of your job as well. And this question of like, where do I fit in? My mom, who's my hero and mentor, she graduated from business school and worked at Chevron for 30 years and retired. And very traditional career. And I remember talking to her, asking her for advice one time, and she was reflecting, like, when I went home, there was no smartphones. I was actually at home. And just imagine, I always use this metaphor of, imagine you're an accountant and Microsoft Excel was invented yesterday. And you've been spending your entire life with that HP calculator that every accountant has. I don't remember the model number, but everyone has the same one. And your binder of numbers. And there's going to be someone around you who goes and learns pivot tables for the first time and is like 100 times more productive than their peers. And then there's going to be some who are really uncomfortable with just the change in the way they do their work. So the advice I give a lot of people is, it's uncomfortable, acknowledge it. This can be a career accelerator though, because using that Excel analogy, no one's an expert in AI. You and I are figuring it out in real time, and we're kind of in the thick of it, right? We're in the middle of it. It's a new technology, so there's not like someone from the outside that actually knows what they're doing. We're all starting from the same starting point. And I think the individuals who have the agency, no pun intended, to really embrace these tools will help you figure out the future of your department. And actually, they'll end up with, be able to differentiate themselves and actually stand apart in their career. And that has been motivating for a lot of the folks at Sierra, at a lot of the clients that I speak with. And one of the ways we try to operationalize that is at our all hands every week, we have a segment called Built with AI. You nominate yourself to speak in this, and it's basically, what is the work hack that you figured out with AI? To give a really concrete example, we had a salesperson who used ChatGPT deep research to research the clients before they did a first call, and then they would personalize our first call deck with that deep research. And he showed a couple of before and after slides, and it was really good. I mean, it was one of those things where like, why didn't we do this before? So we made an AI agent that helped our other salespeople do it, and we named the AI agent after him. Just to sort of, this idea being like, we're not gonna tell you to use AI, you're not only allowed to do it, you're encouraged to do it. And there's a little bit of sort of culturally reflecting, like the people embrace this, they're the ones who are gonna succeed here, and it creates a sense of optimism and agency, and this is exciting, this will help me do my job better. So that's the advice I give, but I do want to acknowledge it is super uncomfortable. I mean, it is, if you just pick up the newspaper, and I have a lot of cousins graduating from university, and it's like harder to find a job right now. So I just also think it's really important to be really transparent, about like your operating goals. Patronizing people and like, is like rarely, it just doesn't work. We're in an era of authenticity and social media and all this. So my whole thing is be really direct about the goals, but also be clear that like, you're not bringing anyone from the outside. Like we're all new at this. And I think that can feel more empowering. But I also just want to acknowledge like the technology is moving faster than most of us can reskill ourselves. It's happening in our profession. I identify as a computer programmer, and I'm not sure that specific career is going to be what it was for me growing up in 2 years. So we're all going through this at the same time. So like, don't patronize and I think making it like a bottoms up empowering message is the advice that I have.
It's funny. I mean, one of the things you had mentioned is this model you created is now it's selling insurance. It's doing all these things that maybe you didn't expect. And I think something that all of us here in this room that's very important for the finance function is, of course, speed is important, but correctness is very important. How do you think about and what's your framework for fostering experimentation to kind of experience the benefits of what these models can do while managing financial risk, operational risk, audit risk? How should we all think about that?
So first I'll start with this simplistic, but actually I believe important grounding for this, which is even large language models are non-deterministic, meaning for the same inputs, they can occasionally produce different outputs, and they are flawed. If you're waiting for them to be perfect, they will never be perfect. Let's just start there. Number two is, even though they're flawed, they're less flawed than our people. They just are. Even a person with a great software system can type in a number incorrectly. I don't know what caused that Citibank $500 million like accidental charge, but it was just, it was human error. So I think it's also important to recognize if you're comparing it to 100%, it might not be the correct way to think about it because you already have flaws in your business. Okay, so what do you deal with this? Non-deterministic, occasionally flawed, but probably less flawed than a lot of people are. How do you deal with that? I think most people think of computers as things you're trying to make perfect. And so I think it's actually the wrong comparison. If you think about these, if you sort of anthropomorphize the AI and you think it's actually doing a process that a person previously would have done, my guess, especially for those of you at public companies, you have controls in place. You have audits. You don't assume perfection. That's why controls exist. You actually assume imperfection, and the purpose of your controls is to find it and remediate it. I actually think that's a healthier way to think about AI. And I think if you think about AI in that term, you may already actually have some of the controls in place because you probably already have it for your people. And that's why, if you think about, for example, auditing revenue recognition and contracts at the end of the quarter, those are written by people. There might be, Ernst & Young might have a different opinion than your own accounting department. That happens already. And if you have AI agents sort of as a part of that process, it doesn't need to change. I think the main mental leap is just acknowledging its imperfection. And I think if people do that, you can actually find more opportunities to adopt this AI more quickly. And I think it's very important, particularly for those of you sort of in compliance or finance. One of the things you can do is rather than just focus on the risk, is focus on the controls. If you actually give your teams the guardrails and let them innovate within that, it can be a much more constructive conversation than just focusing on what could go wrong. If you have the conversation, okay, when something goes wrong, how will we know, is actually a very constructive conversation compared to how can I know nothing ever goes wrong. And I would just make the argument, and really obviously different applications are different. Some things, for example, despite the fact AI agents can pass the CFA exam, I don't think they'd be allowed to give financial advice yet. So there's some things that are truly just regulatory no-nos. For a lot of these, it's just risk mitigation. And I think just treating it as a mitigation and controls problem is a lot more constructive than just saying no, and certainly more constructive than assuming 100% perfection.
Well, maybe this finance organization might be better suited than almost any other organization to adopt AI. I think it's actually a pretty compelling case. And I'm curious too. We've set the right controls frameworks. We're starting to go and automate away, let's say, routine finance work, maybe tagging expenses, recommending categories, and kind of the rote operational work starts to disappear. And also, you see this too in your roles. These models are getting dramatically better. The context windows are expanding. The speed is going up. I'm curious just if you kind of zoom out over the course of the coming years for the finance function, what strategic capabilities do you think might emerge for finance teams? How do you think finance organizations might change and evolve and shift over the coming years?
It's a great question. When I think about the relationship I've had with my CFO or my head of planning, FP&A style relationship, it's very strategic. It's like, what is the future of our business? How can we perform the same function, generate more free cash flow over time? Like, how can we increase leverage in the business? All these things are like truly strategic discussions. And then you lift up the hood of finance departments, and there's so much just sort of like, just keeping the machine running. And especially as you think about expanding internationally, or, like one of the things I really love about Ramp is we're scaling our sales team a lot. And so much of all the work we used to have to do around travel and entertainment expenses and just like policing it, I don't have to do anymore. We just literally program the policy and it's just enforced for me. And it's a great example of something that used to be a part of the finance department that wasn't strategic, right? It's like literally babysitting or policing behaviors I just don't have to think about anymore. I think that's the opportunity. So the way I think about it not being, you've all forgotten more about finance than I will ever know. But I do know like the value of departments shouldn't be tactical and operational, it should be strategic. And I would just hope that as AI becomes a more meaningful part of the department, you can just go up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And rather than like auditing expenses, you can talk about what should our policies be? Yeah. And that's actually the discussion you've always wanted to have, right? Because that's actually like the important part of it. And then I go back to things like international expansion and just like a lot of the complexity there. it really should be like, how do you sort of amplify the value proposition of the business and drive efficiency of the business? And so much of it, the calories we've been spending is the inputs to that rather than, the actual strategy itself. So I am a huge believer in this. Actually, going back to the spreadsheet analogy, there's not fewer investment bankers in New York since the investment of the spreadsheet, but I actually would have a hard time imagining being an investment banker before the spreadsheet. I mean, I know they existed, but you think about like how much of it now is actually step one is build a model, right? I'm actually excited for reimagining finance 3 or 4 years from now, once we get past the like first order effects of AI, of sort of like automating some of what we do already, and then think about what is the new shape and skill set of these departments once you just assume this exists. And I don't know if I know what that is yet. I mean, that's why when I was joking, I couldn't imagine, investment banking without a model and a spreadsheet. I can sort of imagine it, but I can't. And I'm looking forward to like being here with you 5 years from now where we've gotten past the point and we're saying, okay, of course AI agents are doing all of those things. Let's talk about the next horizon. It's hard for me to imagine some of the second and third order effects sitting right here.
Maybe zooming out, for me and for all of us, you're really have a unique purview and seat and kind of understand the progression of these models. I think about when we first used GPT-3, a few years ago, we were shocked and stunned when it could kind of construct a paragraph and it was all right and worked and that was moving. And now I think about, there's 100-page deep research dossiers we do and we're like, there's a footnote is off, just a little bit.
I joke, by the way, if you talk to anyone 3 years ago and you ask them what artificial general intelligence is, we've far exceeded that. And we just keep moving the goalposts because, what have you done for me lately? So
I totally agree. I mean, I'm curious and you're seeing and involved with organizations that are investing sums of funds and intelligence and infrastructure unlike we've ever seen before. And so, maybe even just zooming out from, purely finance to just the capabilities and what you think is coming over the next 2 to 5 years. How should we think about that? How should we conceptualize of what capabilities might come online? What might it mean generally for work, more abstractly?
Yeah, I'll talk about the models and then I'll talk about consumer behavior, which is probably the biggest unknown, but I'll put it this way. We know consumer behavior is going to change dramatically. There's a lot of predictions on how, but I don't think anyone really knows. On the capability side, we are moving towards models sort of being one shot, give me an answer or do some reasoning, to long-running processes, dealing with ambiguity, truly the purest form of agent. The word agent comes from agency, and it essentially means giving AI software some ability to reason and make decisions autonomously and take action. As the models become more reliable and platforms like yours and Sierra, we build sort of the scaffolding around it, they'll have more and more complex, more and more long-running processes running on top of it. And that's exciting. It will go from essentially performing a task to running a process. And we're getting there in some forms, but certainly over the next 3 years, as the models and tool calling and all these things become better, we will be there. And that's really, really exciting. Consumer behavior is an interesting one. So when I go to a cocktail party, partly because my OpenAI role, I get asked 2 questions, which is, what should my child study at university? And I'm like, I have no idea. And number 2, how do I make my business show up in ChatGPT? Also have no idea. I'm just kidding. Just last week, OpenAI announced ChatGPT apps, which is sort of one of the second or third attempt at sort of like how can businesses optimize their experience. But if you look at the internet economy and how much is sort of oriented around Google, so much of the world's intent goes through Google search that you have this whole ecosystem built around it. Search engine optimization, search engine marketing. And then you have social networks where you have a lot of demand generation. So Instagram, TikTok, et cetera, that's where a lot of television ad spend is going and a lot of demand gen is happening. Now you look at ChatGPT and to a lesser degree Gemini, and a lot of the consumer intent is going there. For me personally, we went to a trip to Europe this summer. I'd never been to Copenhagen before. every single thing our family did in Copenhagen, ChatGPT told me to do. Everything, where we stayed, what we visited, and it was amazing. It was like the best travel agent I've ever had. And you think about just what that means if you're everyone from a travel aggregator like Expedia or TripAdvisor to Airbnb to the museum that we visited, that really impacts your business, right? And so I think there's a few things which I think consumers are going to start using ChatGPT. And again, it's not only ChatGPT, but I think that is the Kleenex of the facial tissue market. That's like where the puck is going, as Wayne Gretzky said. That is, consumers are going to be using that for a lot of decision making. Even like every time I get a lab result, I upload it to ChatGPT before talking to my doctor. I don't know if he likes it. I recommend it. I show up way more educated. It's going to impact all parts of our business. So that's one. Your consumers, even if you're a B2B customer, your customers are doing this. Secondly, because agents will also impact the consumer world, there will be some things where via tools like ChatGPT, a consumer will dispatch an agent to interact on their behalf. And so if you read people like Ben Thompson or something, Stratechery, he has this whole theory of aggregators, and I really recommend you read it because it sort of goes through the web and search and the mobile and the app store, and now you have AI and you have consumer services, again, primarily ChatGPT, and what is your relationship to your customers in that world? And no one really knows yet, but it's going to be as significant as your relationship to Google and the internet. This is where intent is being captured, where's consumers going. The interesting, in the spirit of Mark Twain, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. The thing that is different about it is consumer agents, and where you might find content through these other services, the delegation to an AI changes a lot, and that is fascinating to me. I've talked to one large telecommunications executive. We do a lot of telecommunications AI, saying we spend a lot of time on promotions. Sort of saying, hey, if you're going to switch from this carrier to another carrier, we'll give you, family plan for free or whatever it is. If it's an AI having that interaction, how do you persuade an AI agent? Will it sort of be regress to the lowest common denominator? I don't know. But I think you should start thinking about this because you're going to be in this world where your consumers will have quite a bit of technology at their disposal. Agents will be a part of your consumer interaction model. And I think, as with all interesting technology trends, it's usually the second order effects that are the interesting ones. It's not just going to be a digitization of what we do today. How do you not commoditize your brand or get disintermediated? What is your presence in this world? That's fascinating to me. And unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball on it, but I think that's probably one of the more interesting trends that I would look out for over the next few years.
Maybe just to close out, I think all of us are in this moment thinking about how to rise to the occasion, how to get it right, and be that, whether it's first person to say, you know what, I am going to use Excel and I'm going to be an expert in this. I want to adopt these new and different ways of working. Is there, A, like parting advice that you would give to everyone here? And then B, if you kind of look back in 5 years from now and have a sense of which companies got this right, what would you be looking for?
I'll just end with a note of real optimism here, which is, I think a lot of industries sort of become somewhat ossified. If you look at, we're talking the telecommunications industry, if you map the market share of different mobile carriers over the past 20 years, there are moments, inflection points, like when SoftBank brought the iPhone to Japan, it increased their market share dramatically. But in between those inflection points, you end up with, sort of because of the margins of investors expect and just the ossification of the industry, you end up with these relatively stable points. I believe AI, generative AI, whatever you want to call it, this current generation is an inflection point. And so I think it's an opportunity let's just talk about cost reduction for a second. I joke, I had one investor ask me, so with AI doing blah, blah, blah productivity, free cash flow is going to do yada, yada. And I'm like, have you ever met a CEO in your life? Because if you ever talk to any CEO and they can save $10 and invest $9 to grow faster than their competitor, they'll do it 100% of the time. So people are sort of like literally translating a lot of these cost savings and like just assuming it's going to be passed on to shareholders. No, we live in like a capitalist economy. What's going to happen is if you end up with higher margins because you have a more efficient business, you can invest in customer acquisition, perhaps you can lower prices. There's all these things that happen from it. So the thing I would say is like in the haves and have-nots is just, I've talked about like first and second order effects, like you should think about cost savings. It doesn't mean that's the goal, but if you think about what can you do if you have more operating leverage than your competitors, that's a really interesting thing. And in particular, if you think about industries where, you know, if you have a business with a 10,000 person contact center and you can reduce your investment there and increase the lifetime value of your customer, reduce churn, that's incredible. I mean, that's worth more to your shareholders than any amount of cost savings. So that's the thing I would think about is really like, how can this actually change, like bend the curve of your operating model? And what does that mean for your industry? And I think it's an opportunity for insurgents to become incumbents. And in particular, one of the things that I'm sort of a student of software, and I'm sorry for my long answer, but I was at Google relatively early days. So I started in end of 2002. And we went from this building in Mountain View and then we moved into Silicon Graphics' old campus. And it was interesting because Silicon Graphics had built a campus, like they were a big company, like big enough to have a campus, and we took it over because they were going out of business. And then at Facebook, we moved from our Palo Alto office to the campus in Menlo Park. It was Sun Microsystems' old campus, which was also big enough to have a campus. And then we bought their used campus because they didn't need it anymore because they had gone out of business or technically been acquired, but it was a pretty depressing acquisition. And the half-life of tech companies is not that long. That's the challenge for the two of us. Like the challenge for Ramp is not what you can do with it, but can it outlive you? And I think it can, but that's the ultimate challenge. And I say that now because I actually think it's in some ways harder for market leaders to make business model changes than it is for insurgents. And so for all of you who have that competitor, I don't know. I think it's one of the more interesting times in business right now. And I think it's harder. It's just an opportunity, like the strategic deck of business is sort of shuffled right now. And I think that's quite exciting. It's stressful, but I think it's really exciting. And so for all of you, I would just say, I think there's just an opportunity to, where you're not number one in a market to become number one, where you have a vision for your business that has been out of reach because you don't have the capital to allocate. This is a time where you can generate that capital. And I think that's super exciting.
It's, I don't know if it was you who made this decision or someone else at Facebook at the time, but I always like, even to this day, when you leave that campus, so when you come in, you can see the sign that says, welcome to Facebook, one hacker away, but on the back of it, you can see what was the old Sun Microsystem, just the outline, which maybe is a reminder every day that it too can happen to you.
No joke. The conference rooms, we kept the numbering on them, and there was this period of the 90s where everyone had like these like shapes, like a triangle and a circle with like numbers over it. It was this weird period of graphics. You know what I mean, right? Like every shirt from the 90s. And so it just had this like very like vintage early 90s vibe. And it was a way to remind everyone like we are in the carcass of a dead company, and like don't let this happen to you, and I find it motivating for what it's worth.
I think it's awesome. It's exciting. It's look, I think all of us got into business because we wanted to build something that matters and outlives us. And so, thank you for sharing all this. Giving energy some practical ways to think about what we're living through. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think a lot of special companies are going to be built here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thank you for building Ramp.
Thanks a lot, Bret. This is great.